Jacksonville before the fire was a bustling city. According to the author of The Great Fire of 1901, Bill Foley, Jacksonville's population in 1900 was almost 30,000. We had 18 miles of paved roads, 4 parks, 9 banks, 79 churches, and the largest ostrich farm in the U.S. We had many hotels because Jacksonville was a large tourist area. During the winter season, tourists would swarm our area, making it more than 3 times its summer size. Although Jacksonville was a big tourist location with nice hotels, it still had some barren locations. Just a few blocks away from the St. James and Windsor hotels were muddy roads with noisy activity on the docks. Sometimes chickens and pigs would even walk these streets. Jacksonville at this time was a growing town with great potential. Here are some important buildings in this time period. This is the Armory. It was completed in 1897. It was built of solid granite and held all types of weapons. It sat on the corner of Market and Adams Street and stood 3 stories tall. Pictured here is the Duval County Courthouse. It was built in 1886. It sat on the corner of Market and Forsyth Street, and it had walls so thick that it was thought to withstand anything. This is the City Hall and its clock tower. The clock tower was completed in 1896 and was a cost of $95,000. Lastly, here is the St. James Hotel. It was the largest hotel in the city and one of the most famous in the South. It could hold up to 500 guests and had many amenities. This is where it all began. Right here at the corner of Davis and Ashley Street, the Great Jacksonville Fire of 1901 started. On May 3rd of 1901, at approximately 12:30 p.m., sparks from a wood stove ignited Spanish moss next to the Cleveland Fiber Factory. This began the fire. The fire, within just a few short minutes, had already spread half a mile eastward and was continuing to spread. Within just a few short hours, it would destroy almost all of our downtown area. This fire birthed right here at this very corner and has left a mark on Jacksonville's history forever. It was 12:35 p.m. The fire was quickly accumulating, and 16-year-old George Hoden pulled the 57th box fire alarm on the corner of State and Davis Street. Within 10 minutes, Chief Thomas Haney and his men arrived at the factory. By 1 p.m., the fire is out of their control. Much fire covered the firefighters, and Chief Haney collapses from heat prostration. The fire started to spread down the streets, and the people were starting to fear. As the fire burned harder and the winds grew stronger, reaching about 18 miles an hour, the fire was destroying everything and anything in its path. The panic was sweeping over downtown as they were running for their lives and doing everything they possibly could to get away from this monster of a fire. Hearing the crackling of the fire catching up to them and their screaming neighbors trying to get away pushed them to their limits and made them run as fast as they could. Even after getting away from the fire, there was still much devastation for some of Jacksonville, as they were realizing they had lost all of their belongings and there was nothing they could do but watch their homes burn. 5 p.m. struck, and all of our important buildings, along with the St. James Hotel and the Armory, and even the fire station, had been destroyed. Finally, around 7:30, the wind calmed, and within the hour, the fire was brought under control. Finally, at 5:25 a.m. the next morning, the last fireman was released to go home, or at least what was left of it. Eyewitnesses of the flames have a much clearer perspective of what happened that day. Here are just 3 of the many remarkable stories of what took place on May 3rd of 1901. Ruth Stewart resided next to the Cleveland Fiber Factory where the fire began. She heard the yelling of fire all up and down the street. She could see big wads of moss breaking loose from the fire and factory. She described them as big old balls of fire and blames those balls of fire for why the city burnt down that day. Mary Williams was only 11 years old when she experienced the Jacksonville fire. After running with her family to Riverside Avenue, a place of safety, she and 40 other refugees were crying in devastation. Since the bank was burnt down, you would wonder what they did with all the money it held. Well, according to Mary Williams, Mr. Stockton, the president of Florida National Bank, had all of the money moved in sacks to his home. Men slept on the sacks with handguns by their side. Last but not least, and my personal favorite story, is Mrs. O'Quinn. When she heard the shouts of fire, she decided to go check it out, until she saw how serious the fire really was and quickly made a turnaround for her home, where she would save her dog, cat, and parrot. Unfortunately, her cat didn't make it, but her dog and parrot ran for safety. Mrs. O'Quinn's husband, John, was working that day, so she didn't know his whereabouts. She searched for him for 3 days until they finally reunited. After searching for a spare room and finding nothing, Mrs. O'Quinn and her husband lived in an attic. Remarkably, through this terrible time, her and her husband never once thought about leaving Jacksonville. According to her, Jacksonville was their home. Just over there is the corner of Market Street and Coastline Drive. That is where the Market Street horror of the Great Fire of 1901 took place. Thousands of people were swarmed in this exact location, trying to get over to the other side, what they hoped would be safety. A man and a great heroic figure by the name of William Clark used his boat called Irene to take many trips back and forth to try to save as many people as he could. He died in the midst of this. He was last seen carrying a woman to safety and then was found later, his burnt body. This is a very important piece of the story of the Great Fire of 1901 because it shows that in the midst of such a great terror, there were still many selfless people who were willing to give up their own life. When it was all said and done, the Great Jacksonville Fire of 1901 was the third largest metropolitan fire ever. The degree of damage can be seen in these photos. It was about 8 hours long. It burnt 466 acres of land. We lost about $15 million of property and $5 million of insurance. 7 people lost their lives, and between 9,000 to 10,000 people were homeless. Lastly, 2,368 buildings were destroyed. Within just 24 hours, Jacksonville was stolen of almost all it had by this great fire. Being a town with such potential, it was a true heartbreak to our city. Now it was time for the people of Jacksonville to unite together and mend what was left of their homes. Henry John Clutho is sometimes referred to as an architect for a new century. 7 years before his arrival to Jacksonville, Clutho had read all of the destruction that came with the Great Jacksonville Fire in the New York Times. He came to Jacksonville with a vision in mind. That vision was to rebuild downtown Jacksonville and design a new city. His Prairie School-style masterpiece of the St. James Hotel was just one of his many works of art he brought to this new city. Henry John Clutho was a remarkable architect who made this fire have a very positive outcome on our city. This is the rebuilt St. James Building, and now, present day 2013, this is our City Hall. Although this wasn't the courthouse that was built in 1901 just after the fire, it is our 2013 present-day courthouse that just opened last year. So, overall, during the time of the Great Jacksonville Fire, this destruction was seen as a tremendous negative. But today we can look back at this fire and see how far we have come as a city, and look to it as a positive. This fire has made Jacksonville what it is today, and has given it character that has changed our history forever. We weren't at the fire when it happened, and we will never understand what the people went through at this time. All we have to look at now is pictures of the fire and a memorial downtown on Coastline Drive as pictured here. We must never forget where our city came from as we look to the future, which has been made brighter by its past.